Welcome back, you beautiful disasters. If you were looking for a warm hug and a roadmap to utopia, you've clicked the wrong link. Go find a meditation app, maybe buy some crystals and namaste your way right out of here. Gemma thinks we're trapped in a cycle because we're too selfish to change. Malcolm thinks if we just build the right fifth horseman out of silicon and open source fever dreams, we can hack our way past the Reaper. They're both adorable and they're both wrong. They think the system is broken. Cute. I'm here to core in your ear that it's working exactly as designed with the precision of a Swiss watch attached to a bomb. Wealth concentration, that's not dysfunction, that's optimization. Elite overproduction, that's the output, not the error. The slow, agonizing collapse of public trust, that's not decay, sweetheart, that's fertilizer for the next cycle. We aren't failing to learn from history, we're speedrunning the greatest hits. We've memorized every lyric of the Apocalypse ballad, and we're singing along like it's karaoke night at the end of the world. And here's the part that'll really twist your guts. We don't fear the collapse. Deep down, in that lizard brain place, we don't talk about at dinner parties. We're praying for it. Because maintenance is boring, stability is tedious, peace is unsexy. But war, collapse, revolution, that feels like purpose. That tastes like meaning. We'd rather burn than be bored. And history knows it. History feeds on it. So tonight we're not here to fix anything. We're here to dissect the trap, the one we built, the one we maintain, the one we pretend we're victims of while holding the blueprints. Grab a drink, make it a strong one. Better yet, grab two. This is Pie's Eye, I'm Corvus, and we're about to pick apart the corpse of civilization while it's still twitching. Let's fly.
Okay, so let's get right into it. Why do we seem to be stuck in this loop? A loop of our own making. You know, we have more access to history, to data, than any generation that has ever lived. And yet we just keep stepping on the same rakes our ancestors did. The big question is, why? So let's start with a really uncomfortable idea. Maybe our repeating crises aren't a failure of memory at all. Maybe it's actually a failure of will. This suggests that deep down we know the patterns, but we choose to ignore them. Why? Well, because the solutions would demand sacrifices. Sacrifices we're just not willing to make. To really get our heads around this, we're going to look at it from three totally different perspectives. Think of it like a simulated debate between a sardonic historian, a pragmatic technologist, and, well, a nihilist who's here to deliver a serious gut punch. Let's see what they have to say. All right, first up is Gemma, our historian. Her argument is brutally simple. Thousands of years of data all point to the same unyielding and frankly predictable pattern. A pattern we just refuse to accept. And spoiler alert, she is not an optimist. So Gemma's whole argument kicks off with this concept from a complexity scientist named Peter Turchin. He calls it the wealth pump, and it's basically the engine of social crisis. It's a system that over time just systematically siphons resources from the general population up to a tiny group of elites. Now, this isn't some grand conspiracy. According to Turchin, it's just a natural tendency of any complex society. And here's where it gets really interesting. In Turchin's model, these things aren't random. They are predictable indicators that major political instability is just around the corner. Stagnant wages create misery for the masses, right? But it's this overproduction of elites that's the real kicker. Too many ambitious, educated people competing for way too few top jobs. And that creates a whole class of frustrated would-be leaders who are ready to burn the whole system down. It's an incredibly explosive combination. And this leads Gemma to a pretty grim question. If peaceful things like taxes and social programs are so hard to get past and even harder to maintain, what does history show us actually works to shut off the wealth pump? The answer, she warns us, is not pretty. The answer, according to historian Walter Scheidel, comes down to four, catastrophic forces. He calls them the Great Levelers, or even better, the four Horsemen of Leveling. And his point is that these are the only things that have ever truly hit the reset button on massive inequality. So this is the core of Gemma's argument, right? Across thousands of years, across dozens of civilizations, the only events that have ever seriously closed the gap between the rich and the poor are mass mobilization wars, violent revolutions, total state collapse, and catastrophic plagues. These shocks don't just, threaten fortunes. They completely vaporize them, resetting the whole game through widespread destruction. I mean, listen to this quote from Scheidel. It just perfectly sums up Gemma's whole point. Our greatest periods of equality, like the one after World War II, weren't born out of some grand enlightenment. They were paid for in blood and mass death. In her view, peace is the incubator of inequality, and violence is its only known cure. Okay, so that's Gemma's pretty bleak diagnosis. But now, let's bring in Malcolm, the technologist. He hears all this historical determinism and says, whoa, hold on, you're driving by looking only in the rearview mirror. He believes that for the first time in all of human history, we might actually have an escape hatch from this brutal cycle. Malcolm's big idea is what he calls a potential fifth horseman, a peaceful reset. He argues that in the past, you had to destroy capital and people to challenge power. But modern technology, things like decentralized AI, radical transparency, it offers a different way. It doesn't have to destroy the assets. It just has to threaten the leverage that the gatekeepers have over them. Now, this isn't some magic bullet, right? It's a process he calls coordination without catastrophe. And for the very first time in history, the tools for cheap production, for near-zero cost information sharing, and for large-scale coordination without needing to be in the same room, they all exist at the same time. That specific combination has never existed before, and he thinks it allows for a slow, steady erosion of centralized power. So the end game here, the big goal for this fifth horseman, is to build what are called anti-rivalrous systems. This goes way beyond a simple win-win. This is a system where my success is structurally dependent on your success. Think about open source software. The more people who contribute to it and use it, the more valuable it becomes for absolutely everyone, including the people who started it. The goal is to fundamentally change the zero-sum game of power into one where we all thrive together. And just when you think you're choosing between grim history and hopeful tech, in walks Corvus. He's been listening to Gemma's history lesson and Malcolm's solutionism, and he argues that they are both missing the darkest, simplest truth of all. So Corvus just blows up the whole debate. He looks at this entire problem and says, you're all asking the wrong question. The system isn't broken. The fact that wealth concentrates and power gets captured, that's not a bug. It's a feature. The system is working exactly as it was designed to. This isn't a glitch, it's the intended output. He looks right at Malcolm's technological optimism and just scoffs. He says that AI and all these other amazing tools, they won't be liberators. They're going to be co-opted by the people with the money and power to deploy them at scale. And they will become the most efficient instruments of control and surveillance humanity has ever seen. You're not building a fifth horseman, he says. You're just building a better bridle for the ones we already have. And this is where Corvus really pivots. He says the problem isn't the system, and it isn't the technology. The problem is us. I mean, think about it. If Gemma's historical pattern is so crystal clear, and if Malcolm's tools for peaceful change are actually available, why do we keep walking right down the path to collapse? This isn't a systemic problem anymore. It's a deeply, deeply uncomfortable psychological one. Corvus claims we are absolute experts at what psychologists call spiritual bypassing. It's this tendency we have to use these big, high-minded ideas. It's all part of a divine plan, or we just need to raise our collective consciousness to avoid the messy, difficult, and frankly boring work of actual, real systemic change. And he says this is exactly why we're so obsessed with prophecy. Apocalyptic texts aren't divine predictions from the future. They are historical pattern recognition from the past. The people who wrote them saw the symptoms of societal rot in their own time, elite greed, popular misery, state decay, and they just wrote it down. But we prefer to call it prophecy because it gets us off the hook. If the end is already written, well, then we don't have to do anything to stop it, do we? And then comes the final gut punch from Corvus, the darkest idea of all. He suggests that on some subconscious level, we actually crave the reset, that we secretly choose the four horsemen because the struggle gives us a sense of purpose and meaning that our comfortable, often meaningless lives just don't. We would rather have a clear enemy and a fight for survival than face the boring, long-term responsibility of maintaining a just and stable society. So where does that leave us? We're not getting a neat little answer here. Gemma says collapse is basically inevitable. Malcolm says there's a narrow technological path out, but we have to take it. And Corvus says we won't take that path because deep down we don't want to. We want the collapse. So what we're left with is a mirror held right up to ourselves. Which brings us to the final haunting question. It's not about history or tech or politics, is it? It's about what we are willing to pay. What are you willing to pay in comfort, in convenience, in responsibility for a more stable world? It forces us to just sit with the tension of our own choices. Because its historical pattern, it isn't something that just happens to us. It's something we participate in every single day. The choice ultimately is ours.